So over the weekend, I watched a couple of Star Wars movies with Noah. The last two, the most recent two, and in the final one, Kylo Ren, the bad guy, who actually turns out not so much to be the bad guy as the lost guy, but Kylo Ren says this great line. He says, "Let the past die, kill it if you have to." And it's a really cool line. Like I remember the first time I watched the movie and I heard that, I kind of was like, "Whoa, that just sounds so awesome, doesn't it?" And it fits in really, really well with our current mode of thinking, really, right? Let the past die, kill it if you have to. Because the problem is that the past defines us. It tells us who we are, tells us what we stand for. And so when we kill the past, it essentially means liberation. It means that we have a freedom to just write our own narrative, to create our own story. If we kill the past, then we can be whomever we want to be. And that's kind of the predominant cultural myth that we have right now, that we can define who we are just simply by saying so. We just create our own story and we construct our own reality simply with words. But unfortunately, this is the worst kind of myth. Usually a myth is some kind of a foundational archetypal story that it gives us a sense of place and a sense of purpose and tells us who we are and what we're doing. It tells us the reason why things are the way that they are and why. But instead, we embrace this belief that we can define ourselves independently of reality. And that actually becomes more of an anti-myth, really. It's actually a made-up story that strips us of meaning rather than a story that actually gives us meaning and purpose. And it's like we believe that we're the product of some kind of parthenogenesis, right? That we've somehow just created ourselves. We just sort of emerged on our own out of the chaos. And that's the worst kind of pride. And it's actually vanity too. And I don't mean vanity in the sense of just excessive pride, which it is, of course. But vanity also means futility or worthlessness. In Ecclesiastes, we read about how all is vanity, right? It has no meaning. And there's a couple of reasons why this is true. And the first that I want to talk about is identity. And while it seems wonderful that we could just simply define ourselves, that's not really how identity works. Because identity isn't just something that we declare. Identity is actually something that's conferred upon us or bestowed upon us. And that's because our identity, it's not just my description of myself, right? My identity is my description of myself in relation to others. So I'm a husband, a father, a son, a minister, a friend, an adversary. But I am none of these things on my own. My identity is only valid when I'm embedded within a larger story, a larger narrative, when I'm embedded in history. So identity is given to us from the outside, not from the inside. And we see this when we look at Jesus' baptism. So that really is kind of the ultimate identity narrative. So Jesus took part in a rite that initiated him into a community. And then a voice from heaven declared, "This is my son, in whom I am well pleased, my beloved." So Jesus' identity was actually given to him. It wasn't seized. It wasn't something that he just declared and said, "By the way, this is who I am." Now, I think part of the attraction, though, that we have of just not being identified by our community and actually giving our own identity is because sometimes we're saddled with an identity that we would rather not have. So maybe in our life we've made some mistakes, we've made some poor choices, other things that have happened to us are out of our control, but the end result is that maybe people aren't looking at us the way that we would like them to. Maybe we don't really like some of the things that we have done or what we have become. So our easy solution would be to let the past die, kill it if we have to, right? We'll move somewhere else where nobody knows us. We want that fresh start. We want to begin again on our own terms, and then we can tell other people who we are. But the problem is that when we kill the past, we don't merely just divorce ourselves from our past mistakes. We actually become completely unmoored and completely untethered. So when we make that decision that we're going to exist separate from history, then all of a sudden we find that we're not part of something that's larger than ourselves anymore. There's no grand purpose. There's no life's work. So when we live outside of history, there is no greater goal really than just personal satisfaction. That's the best we can hope for. And we guarantee that this meaninglessness will perpetuate in our lives as we continue to perpetuate this anti-myth of the fact that we exist outside of history. Because when we live into this idea that we're these autonomous, self-created beings that have no past, at the same time that we do that, we're teaching others to do the same. But the problem is that we're also part of other people's history, right? So when we negate our history and we encourage others to negate theirs, actually we undermine our own influence on them. So no history also means no memory and no legacy. So if we have no past, actually, if we cut off our past, we actually eliminate our future as well too. That simply is just a non-thing anymore. To have any kind of purpose or meaning, we have to be moving from some place to somewhere else, right? So with no past, with no starting point, any movement that we make, it's wandering, right? It's mere pointlessness. So with no past, we can have no future. And with neither of those things, we have no actual identity in the present, right? It's only in remembering the past that our present has any meaning. And it's only by remembering the past that we can ever have any kind of hope for the future. So curiously, well, maybe not curiously, inevitably somewhat, for the Christian, hope for the present and hope for the future is found in the past. So if we've made some mistakes and we want a fresh start, we want to erase that history, we could try and kill the past, and we can make up an identity that really isn't us. Or we could look backwards, and we could look into our past, and we could see that identity that God originally conferred upon us right at the very beginning. The identity to be his people, to walk in harmony with him, to abide in his love. We could look back in the past and actually reclaim that. And that's essentially what Kylo Ren did in Star Wars. So as much as he became lost, he had done terrible things, he remembered that he was a Skywalker, right? He was born one of the good guys. Instead of killing his past, to move ahead, he actually had to reclaim his past. He had to go back further into the past and discover his true identity. And the same is true for us. As Christians, too, we look back into the past and we see how Jesus forgave the very people who were betraying him and turned against him. And to those very people, he promised never to leave and never to forsake them. So this is interesting. It means that we don't need to self-immolate and recreate ourselves out of nothing. We don't need to kill the past. Destruction is not what's called for. It's restoration, that restoration that Jesus promised us in the past. But the thing with restoration, of course, though, is that it's relational, right? Restoration involves other people, and so it involves history. There's a reason why in the Hebrew Testament, when we read the Old Testament, at all the major festivals, at key moments in their history, their teachers would tell them again their history, their story, who they were, where they came from. And in doing so, they would remind the people of their place and of their purpose. So when we look at ourselves as Christians, we stand in this rather unique place within the universe. We stand with both feet planted firmly in the past, and we've got our arms outstretched to the future. And we call that hopeful future into the present. We start living that as a reality right now. So we fully inhabit both the past, the present, and the future. We're inhabiting all three of them at the same time. And what's more, we're sure and confident of our position in each one of these. And that's because our hope for the future and our strength for the present are actually rooted in our past. And thank God for that.